Now, just in case one or two of the Leicester City players are feeling a bit flush going into the end of this season and the start of the next season, I've taken a look to see what's available at the higher end of the development scale in the area. And this interesting plot of land popped up. It's been on the market for some time, and it does have full plan permission. And it's in an area called Newton Harcourt, which looks like it's about 5 miles from the training ground, so it's not too far away. Quite a nice leafy part of the area. So let's just take a look at the plot itself. Quite an individual looking building that's got planning permission. Very nice location. 2 acres of land, lots of forested areas there, and a nice stream river going through. It's about 6,000 square feet, about 550 meters squared. Very individual looking building there, and while tranquil, still has a lot of the modern look and feel. So the planning details are within the description, but it may still be useful to get in contact with the planners to see if everything is okay. So it does say it has planning permission, but it looks like it may have some restrictions, and that may impact the development costs, and potentially if we want to make changes to the scheme, need to go back to scratch and get full planning again. So about 5 miles from Leicester City Station, so fairly good location, but still out of the hustle and bustle of the city centre. So if we look at the development appraisal, we've got the details in here. We don't have the full postcode yet, but we've got an indication of where it is. It is a detached house, and it is large, and we're going to go for best finish. The model out of the box goes up to 200 square meters, so that's 4,000 square foot. So what we'll need to do is make some adjustments to the model, and there's options down here to change the build parameters. And so what we're going to do is just put in 550. So we can see that gives us just about 6,000 square feet. Okay, so let's link through. So and values, right? If we go and try and find some comparable evidence, the only real property I could find in the area was this one at £1 million. But one of the issues with trying to come up with a final value for an individual property like this is comparable evidence is not going to really stand up too well. So this is going to come down to what somebody is prepared to pay for an individual building within a really nice secluded location. Absolutely fabulous location there. So, but we do need to come up with some guidance, and one of the things that we should do at the end of this process is just get on the phones to local agents and also extend that range to national agents as well. So let's make a start and see if we can put in 1.3 million and use that as our guide to progress. So if we look at the development timelines, we're looking at building that if we started now, we're looking to complete in a couple of years' time, and we may be able to shorten some of these durations down because it doesn't have plan permission. That should shorten the timescales unless we go back to the drawing board in terms of redesign, which would mean going back to the drawing board in terms of planning as well. So that would actually extend this period. Let's just take out no planning permission required, so we can get rid of all these costs. Now there are planning conditions, so we may need to revisit the planning costs at some stage. Development financing costs, the loans for the development works currently shown in development costs, financing costs in the region of 800,000. We can come back to that once we've had a good look, and we can speak to some lenders and maybe some brokers and try and look at some of the detailed costs and some of the charges. Project management, we'll need a project manager on this build, quite a big build. We are going to hire an architect to do some more detailed work. Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll allow for a fair old chunk, I think, here in terms of architectural costs. So let's start off with a £20,000 budget. Quite an individual building there. It's going to be very detailed. Mechanical, electrical engineer, we're going to need one of those. So let's put in some outline costs. Because the property values are going over, development costs are going over £1 million, some of the inbuilt suggestions are not coming up, and that's because this is a non-typical building. So quantity surveyor, we'll hire a quantity surveyor and we'll go for an all-inclusive service, and health and safety, absolutely. Employers agents, maybe we'll get the architect or the quantity surveyor to act. We'll probably get the architect to act as the employers agents on this actually, so we may need to up the amounts that we allow for the quantity surveyor services. Building regulation fees, community infrastructure levy. If we're going to build it for ourselves, we wouldn't need to incur that cost, but let's see, we are looking at Leicestershire. Let's see if there's any charging within this particular region, and Harbour I think is the region we're in. Community infrastructure levy hasn't come through yet. We can go through and see if there are any intentions to create community infrastructure levy costs. So maybe it's something we'll have to look into in a bit more detail, because it would be quite a hefty cost on a 6,000 square foot property. We'll come back to that. We'll need to do a detailed review of that, maybe get some advice. So desktop survey, yeah, absolutely. Site investigation. The building will need to have some trial holes. The area itself, I don't think we'd need to pay that much actually. Just a couple of sample trial holes. Let's put in a budget of 15,000 to start with, and that's just because of there's some streams there. It is woodland, may not need to worry too much, but for the type of property we're looking at, I think detailed site investigation is probably warranted. So at the minute we're looking at a build cost of about £1,300. We're not going to do design and build. This is going to be a main contractor, and let's put in a location factor of the East Midlands. Drop some of the prices down a little bit. So we are looking at a build cost of around 700,000, which might be on the low side, given that there's quite a lot of glass and architectural features. It's going to be a lot of bespoke and materials that are going to be required. So I think what we'll do is we'll probably need to allow for quite a lot more in terms of construction costs. So yeah, maybe not as much as that. An overall value of £2,500 a metre squared, possibly not that much. We're going to leave it at around the £1 million mark for the construction costs until we get our quantity surveyor on board and give us a more detailed breakdown. So let's go on from that. Developer's profit does come with planning permission, so the risks on this are reasonably low, although there seems to be some planning constraints. So let's allow for a 15% return on risk. And what we can see straight away after those parameters is that the end value that we're estimating 1.3 simply isn't enough to meet the asking price of 650,000. So what we're probably going to have to do is let's go back to our market value here, and we're probably looking at something closer to 2 million actually. There we go. It looks as though the owners of the land and the design commission, the design that have had commissioned, is looking like we're having to come up with a final resale value of about 3 million, which given that you can buy quite a nice looking property for about £1 million, it's going to be on the high side. So probably going to have to find somebody who's got a big bonus, big win bonus. Maybe the manager can be able to afford it. Some of the other costs, we will have to allow for estate agency fees if we want to sell the property at the end of the process, but if we decide to build and keep, then that's a straight saving. We don't have to worry about that. Some of the land financing costs will probably have to get a broker involved and helping us to acquire the land. Quite a hefty stamp duty up front. So not a cheap development option, but certainly a very interesting plot of land, interesting building. We don't really, if we can, we don't really want to go back to the planning, because that may cause us problems once we've purchased the land. We may not be able to get planning permission if we change the design. So an interesting development opportunity there for somebody who's got a bit of money.